Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the latest collaboration from Tripowin and Hawaii Bad Boy. This one is called Kailua, and it does say dual dynamic driver earphones on the cover. So yes, this one is the dual dynamic driver set. And I'll also say that the initial renders and some of the initial pictures didn't quite do it justice to how it feels in the hand and how it looks in the hand, and it's not quite, it doesn't look like shiny plastic like some of the initial pictures look like. It's actually weighty. I mean, it's got two dynamic drivers and two magnets, so it actually does have weight to it. Not as shiny. It's got a bit of shine to it, but yeah, it's actually very tiny, a little bit shallow. You get this kind of interesting two-pin connector angled like that. So yeah, kind of an interesting one to hold in your hand versus what I thought it was going to feel like and look like from the initial renders. Another interesting thing about this one is the thin cable, and I do have a theory on this one, and I think that it picked that cable because of the fit. And I think for me, the fit is just a little bit shallow, and you don't want a thick, heavy cable with a, maybe an ear hook that's a little tighter, really tugging on the shell, because it doesn't go in all that deep, and it's a little bit lightweight. And, it's just a little bit shallow, I think, to compare to some other sets. So I do think that is a bit of an intentional pick as to a cable that wasn't going to tug on the shell at all. So I think that actually made quite a bit of sense. Ear tips, I think you've seen these couple sets before. I think Tripowin has used these before as well. So that is kind of the basics of what's there. There's nothing in the box. There is no case, but everything else I have actually pulled out. So dual dynamic driver sets, I think for me, the one that actually comes the closest kind of in feeling and vibe for me was Legato. And I think both sets have, I call it the groove and the flow. They're both kind of grounded right around here in the bass area. Male vocals, mid bass, that 70s style music. I think both 7 Hertz and Hawaii Bad Boy are both fans of that style of music. So lots of male vocals grounded right here in this area. I think that just suits both sets very well, and they both do great on those genres. How they handled the treble, a little bit different, but as far as, what set that I think it was actually closest to, it's closest because it's a dual dynamic driver. It's closest, and it's not all that far in price either, but just the general vibe of what sits well and where the sweet spot is on both of those sets. Of course, 7 Hertz went a little bigger on the bass, but as far as a balanced, bassy presentation, I think Kailua is actually right there as well. Definitely got some bass. It's not like it's bass shy at all, but just not as, it's kind of not as tilted as Legato is, but yeah, I think those two kind of reminded me of each other and what tracks and what genres are going to work well for either one. So let's kind of start at the beginning. So why are people interested in dual dynamic drivers? More natural, more technicals is kind of the basics, the gist of it. One dynamic drivers, likable, natural, a bit less technical. I think that would have been one of the main arguments of some of the Harman sets that we've seen recently. Very likable, just not as technical. There are some outliers, EA500, Alina SE, of course, by Hawaii Bad Boy, 10 James Oxygen. So there are a few that are outliers and do those things very well. But to get around that, brands started using dynamic drivers paired with balanced armatures. That kind of ranges from that likable, less technical. You can have balanced armatures that aren't as technical, but gives you a little addition over a single dynamic driver. But these can kind of range to the upper end of almost too technical, too much of balanced armature timbre, too sharp, I think just overpushed on details, not nearly as natural due to the same reasons. And it's really hard to judge where a set lies in that range, especially in the budget range. Someone announces a new one dynamic driver with 3 balanced armatures, and you're not really sure if it sounds more natural or it sounds very technical and more like a balanced armature. So I think it's harder for a consumer to choose those. So 2 dynamic driver theory, you sort of combine both of those. You get the likability of a dynamic driver, better technicals, and still extended and natural. So somewhere between A and B, right? The likable nature of a single dynamic driver, but getting improved technical performance that you would get on a balanced armature set. And kind of between the two. It doesn't quite, maybe technical wise, it won't outperform a high count balanced armature, but I think the idea is that you end up with a more natural, more technical set, and I think both 7 Hertz Legato and Kailua, I think, actually shot for the same target there. Still hard to get the treble extension right, and I think that's why Hawaii Bad Boy mentioned it as well. He actually, if you go back and look at his video, he talked quite a bit about that, and getting, a pair of high quality drivers that, or at least one of them, that actually does extend all the way through treble. And something that he, I think, struggled with on past collaborations, finding that right, perfect driver. So the signature does have its trade-offs. Like I said, it's kind of this bassy, grounded in the lower mid type area. I think you do get more weight. It really shifts towards that lower mids. Doesn't really favor those higher female vocals that we see on Harman style sets, those high energy female vocals. That's not really this style set. I think it does shift away from those. Like EA500 is very, very good at those. Tons and tons of energy right there. And pin gain, maybe a hair too much, but that gives you really sharp separation and really nice female vocals. But I think Kailua hits you with kind of a more relaxed, more rounded, more fun, more generally appealing around HBB's library, right? The 70 styles library. Rap, rock, I think that actually works pretty well on Kailua, worked well on Legato. And for me, I think I will take a modern version of that and say Bastille's MTV Unplugged, right? His male vocals, right there in the sweet spot, those male vocals. There's nice bass right there, just not too much. So this one will do lots and lots of bass, but I actually like it when it's a little bit less. And it really focuses on that natural dynamic driver sound and those textures versus BA specialties, right? Those sharp note definitions, the transients, and all those things that are hard hitting on a balanced armature. This is a groove and a flow kind of sound as opposed to these kind of staccato things that you can get really well on a balanced armature. So, but at the same time, can it do really beautiful female vocals? Yeah, it can, because that Spanish Harlem plays right into dynamic drivers, natural sound, and even on the treble detail and the shaker on that track plays really, really well against two dynamic drivers and a high quality dynamic driver at that. So volume, source, fit. There is still quite a bit of upper range, and it actually does work quite well at lower volumes. It's not, it's kind of really hard. So if we look at this graph, you can kind of see where the levels are. So like I said, bass-wise, you do get a bit more mid-bass, but if you compare it to Cadenza and E500, and so mid-bass is kind of bumped a little bit. But when you look at the upper range, it's not really much lower than those two sets. So there is still quite a bit of energy. There's just a little bit more here. So they get more body, right where a lot of where that groove and the flow is right here, a little more there, but giving you the clarity and details and everything else that you were expecting in the upper range is right there, and that's Kailua in the red. So you can definitely see that the levels really aren't dipped from some other popular sets like Cadenza and EA500. So on those quieter tracks, I do like to click it and turn it up a little. A lot of Bastille, that whole CD, I think I tended to click it up a little bit. When you don't have a whole lot of high energy through it, it's really nice to hear that body in the male vocals, how much detail is actually there. I think that comes across well, even if you click it up once or twice. 18 ohm impedance didn't really seem to change the signature. I'm not sure how Hawaii Bad Boy hooked together the two dynamic drivers. Maybe it's not a crossover. Maybe there's something else that is not affected by impedance, but whatever it is, I tried it just to see if it would actually bump the bass up or bass down. Didn't seem to do that. Didn't change the signature, so warm sound, but the upper range as well. So do try all your sources. Like normally I would say if it's a warm sound, don't pair it with a warm dongle. In this case, you have enough upper range there that you should just try everything you got, because it's really hard to pick which one is going to sound better for you, because you're actually getting both sides on that one. So the fit, like I said, there's it's a bit shallow, and if you can get this thing to fit right there in your ear, and I call it the ear hugging fit, and you feel a little resistance trying to pull it out. It's like everything is locked in place and very secure, and that's what worked for me. So I would call it the fit hugging shallow. That's what worked best for me, and it should resist a little bit when you're removing. If it feels a little loose, then I would try a different cable or try different tips, but it should actually stick in there pretty well. So sound, I'll call it the warmer, not leaned out, still extended V-ish, while trying to maintain technical performance with 2 drivers. I think that's really challenging, and I think you kind of see it, and I think Legato tried to do the same exact thing, and it's just a very challenging thing to do, to provide enough body, enough bass. So this sounds very natural, very fun, weighty body, and male vocals have that chestiness to them, but still pull off extended treble at the right levels. And I think both sets sort of picked lower levels here, less pinna gain, and Legato was really low on the pinna gain. And then Hawaii Bad Boy and Kailua actually bumped it up a little bit, but we're still, that's probably 6 or 7 dB on the pinna gain. So very relaxed, very nice flow from body all the way through the flow right into the treble. I think both sets do that pretty well, but still challenging. So bass, I think I would call bass, that is the flow, that is the groove for me. Like I said, in line with your expectations. If you watch Hawaii Bad Boy's reviews, he is a bass fan. He likes quite a bit of mid bass, and I don't think this one is going to be mid bass lean for too many people. But when you look at it, it's about the same shelf as the Blonde Z300, just 2 different styles. And this goes back to the groove. I think Z300, for me, that one is faster, tighter, bouncier. Kailua is thicker. It has that body rather than the punch that Z300 has. And it favors less beats per minute, slow it down, and you groove with it. I think for me, Z300 was much more of a beats per minute style, and it was kind of fast and rebounded very quickly. And this one is more of a groove to it. Again, very, very much like Legato is, that smooth between notes. I think that is exactly where Kailua sits really well. It'll do lots of sub bass as well, but not really my favorite part. I think a little extra mid bass is really the character here. That's what separates it from a lot of the other recent sets. So the mids, as I said, I'm kind of partial to the lower part where the male vocals sit. I think that's exactly where the sweet spot is, and it really kind of flows with the body, right? You get that arc from the bass shelf right into the mids, carries in some warmth, some body, male vocals sound all right. The mids have a really natural weightiness to them. I think all that part just flows very, very well. But the part that stands out from the pack for me, also the part that it's really easier to notice the details and the resolution when you're listening to those quiet male vocals and those instruments, those guitars right there, especially acoustic guitars, right where Oxygen or even Olina kind of stand out. Do check those out on Kailua. It's actually, again, the leaner Harmon style, so that's a little harder to pull that off. But all that is done, really well, almost like earbuds. It's the details and the resolution are there on earbuds because they have a bigger driver. This one has 2 drivers, but the detail just isn't pushed in your face. It's not sharpened or over sharpened or really pushed, so you have to notice it. It's a very natural presentation on details. So in the mids, as you're traveling up into Miley, Taylor, Madonna, into those higher female vocals, I think that's where you notice the energy level is just a notch lower. And I think Legato has said the same exact thing. What works for instruments and rock in this range, maybe not, will probably have you rolling tips again for those female dominant playlists. I think if your playlists are 90% female and you know that Hawaii Bad Boy's library, because you watch his reviews, he does cover female vocals, but not, probably not into the electronic pop style female vocals that we have here. And I think that's where you sort of start to notice where his library has a sound to it and some other genres have a different sound to it and play better on other sets. And I think that's kind of where I start to notice it, was right there in his female vocals. It sounds very even keeled, I think is how I will call it. It's very clear and smooth and very steady, but not as dynamic. And again, going back to what EA 500 does very well in those Harmon style sets, that pinna area, which is kind of pushed right to the edge of being fatigued or shouty, that gives you a kind of a very high level of female energy. And then Kailua is kind of dipped a little bit, and it's very natural for instruments. But as far as do you love super energetic female vocals, that I don't think that fits with his library as much. So, tips, even keeled, like I said. Treble-wise, and I think this is the toughest part to pin down. I think the graph says great level, like I showed you before, and extension. I think all that is there on the graph. That is all true. Dynamic driver, having 2 dynamic drivers gives you a more natural presentation, no BA timbre. The quality dynamic driver gives you the detailing. I think all those things are right on. So what are my nitpicks on this one? I think the wow moments versus long session enjoyment. So I think where EA500 does very well is in those wow moments. You put it on and you hear a dynamic driver that almost sounds like a hybrid. Very technical, very dynamic. It kind of hits you with a wow moment. The problem is that wow moment only lasts for so long. When you try to do a long session with the EA500, you kind of figure out that you have to change the tips or change the nozzle to the one with the foam. It has a lot of energy that will become fatiguing over a kind of a longer session. And that's sort of where this groove and flow that you get on Kailua, this easiness and relaxed, that really hits you with a long session set. There's no fatigue there. It's just a very slow down. We're gonna relax and enjoy this for a long period of time. But at the same time, for reviews, I think people tend to point out wow moments. So I thought I would mention that. That's sort of a first impression that you get. Kailua has this more relaxed versus EA500, which kind of hits you right in the face with a lot of wow. But if I were to put my finger on it and how the treble was done, I think, and really the process of keeping the energetic instruments of being too energetic, right? So those electric guitars and those cymbals, those things that Hawaii Bad Boy talks a lot about in his reviews, and how he doesn't like those to be too energetic. And I think when he does his tuning, he brings those specific levels down to a level that works out perfectly for him and his music. But when we try to apply it to pop music and you're expecting female vocals or certain electronic instruments to really pop and be at a level that's higher, to me it almost sounds like using a personal EQ where the preferences are close but not the same. His take on those frequencies is slightly different than what Taylor Swift sounds good on, and I think it's like always really close, but there's just a sort of difference when you stray too far from his library in that style and instruments versus electronics and energy levels in the upper range. I think that's where you start to notice that he really tunes for his library and how he likes to hear those instruments, and how that sounds on your library is going to be slightly different. But always interesting to hear that take on it and try to describe. It's actually very hard to describe what comes across in the treble and which parts. And I think when you look at it with legato, you kind of look the same thing. The peaks and the valleys. So legato has a peak right there at 5 point something, and Kailua actually dips there. And how that affects the music that you listen to, that's actually quite a bit of a difference. And so, yeah, to me, it sounds like EQ. It sounds like, well, I got an EQ from someone that had a dip here. I have an EQ from someone where there's actually a peak there. And that's how it comes across on those tracks. So, yeah, very interesting. So stage, come a long way from melee. And that kind of refers back to Hawaii Bad Boy's video on Kailua. He kind of talked about some history there and the treble extension on melee and Alina and Alina SE, and how far we've really come in dynamic driver performance to really do very extended, very nice treble on dynamic drivers. It's been a while since melee, and it's it brought me back, as he was talking about it, kind of brought me back to that period and to realize how far dynamic drivers have come in such a short period of time. But in this one, I think the upper range is doing the part to get it projected out, right? Like I said, there's plenty of upper range energy, plenty of treble extension to get it projected out of your head. Upper treble for the height and the width. If you're into mid bass for depth and contrast, you get that as well. I notice it more so if pin gain is too far and it's a little too bright, you lose the depth, and this one kind of hits the both measures there. The pinna gain is a little bit more relaxed, and there's a lot of bass. You end up with quite a bit of depth. So that is what I got on Kailua. Lots and lots of info there, lots of things to think about, how it matches up to your library, and all the matches that you get in Dynamic Driver and how that would work with your specific playlist. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.